Me, Stephen Thomas with Reports on Housing. Thank you for joining us for yet another housing debrief. Really appreciate that. Thank you. And I invite, of course, everybody to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way we can get this content out to as many people as possible so they can have the real solid real estate facts and data and statistics so they can make great decisions for their family, ignoring all the hyped up narratives that are out there. And if you want a copy of this, of course, you're going to have to be a subscriber to one of our housing reports. Heard somebody say, hey, do you still do reports? Absolutely. That is the mainstay of what we do. We have reports that dot all over Southern California and in the Bay Area. We're looking at other markets to expand to. It's a report that comes out every other week. The most recent one that came out is called Sluggish, Yet No Slide Ahead. Want everybody to know that we're not going to have a crash like so many people talk about. So every once in a while we have to do a report that dispels that rumor, that narrative that housing has to crash because values are so high and interest rates are so high. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not going to happen. And also, in case anybody also doesn't know, but we do presentations. We have our forecast presentation that we just put in a can, delivered our first one, and it is the 2024 forecast. We modify it for each of the counties that we cover, for all of SoCal, each of the counties, and in the Bay Area as well. So if you'd like us to bring this to you, go ahead and reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to book something for a large audience. And so this brings us to our latest topic for the housing debrief. It's called Surging Rates Impact Home Demand. And a lot of that surge in rates came last year, and the biggest impact happened last year. The most recent spike in interest rates has impacted demand, but it really has a hard time bringing down demand tremendously from its already low levels. And yes, we have had interest rates skyrocket higher. I want everybody to understand they're trying to put a finger on exactly where we are right now, comparing it to other times, and we are totally in uncharted waters. Some people say it's like the 70s, the 80s. They make all these comparisons because that's what we like to do as good economists. But it just doesn't hold water. We have not had this kind of data and statistics and the kind of a world economy that we have right now, and had to face a giant pandemic like what we faced as a world. So as a result of that pandemic, we have had supply chain problems and also a lot of money dumped into world economies. And as a result, we had inflation that has just been out of control around the world as well. Top that off with the United States economy just beating everybody's expectations, extremely hot, hotter than what everybody had thought at the beginning of the year, and it just continues to chug along at a very strong, rapid rate. And so the Fed has stepped in. And the Fed has stepped in to counter the inflation, also to make sure that we don't have inflation based upon this really hot job market, this labor market that we have. So they've really targeted right now because we have inflation coming down, but the job market, which, by the way, tomorrow is Jobs Friday, that is very, very important to the Federal Reserve. And so we're going to take a deep dive into government bonds. And why are we talking about, I always talk about 10-year treasuries. We're going to talk about 10-year treasuries, and that's because the investors, they take a look at, they love to invest in bonds, and in especially long-term bonds like 10-year treasuries. When the market really cools, they're dumping more of their money into long-term bonds. And you could see that in that they look at bonds, they also look at mortgage-backed securities. So the same investors looking at both of those because they have a very similar rate of return. So there's this kind of like love relationship between bonds and mortgage-backed securities. So when the 10-year treasuries go up, mortgage-backed securities and interest rates go up. When the yields on bonds go down, we have mortgage-backed securities going down as well as interest rates going down. So that's why we pay very special attention to 10-year treasuries, because that really depends upon what's going on in the economy, what's happening with the Fed. So that's why we are all charting what's going on with the 10-year treasury. And as soon as the United States slows, the safe haven is long-term debt, like what I was talking about. So they'll be parking their money in 10-year treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, and as a result, we'll see 10-year treasuries float down as well as interest rates float down. And so they'll park that money into treasury bonds, and it's just a matter of when that's going to happen. No one quite knows exactly when that is going to occur. And so we're going to take a look at 10-year treasuries. And I'm bringing this up because where the 10-year treasury level is right now, we have not seen for a very long time. You actually have to drill all the way back to 2007 to see the last time we were at where the 10-year treasury has been for the last few days. And if you see where it's been since the start of last year, this is January of 2022 all the way to where we are today. And you can see that this run up has been from a really low level that we were accustomed to for several years because of the pandemic, all the way up to where we are right now today. So it's been a grind up, but it hasn't been straight up. It's been up and a little bit down, more up, little down, and we'll get into exactly what happened. Now, this is where the Fed started ratcheting up interest rates. This is from January to June. We were digesting all the investors and everybody on Wall Street. They were digesting the fact that the Fed was going to start ratcheting up interest rates. Now, I want everybody to understand that what they said back in December of 2021 was they're going to start ratcheting up interest rates starting in March. They didn't start it in December, but because they were going to go there, that's why we saw 10-year treasury go up and we saw interest rates go up. Back in September of 2021, they didn't think they were going to have to move the short-term rate much at all for 2022, which means that their long-term vision is very cloudy. They are not very good at forecasting where they need to be. They're very good at forecasting where they should be right now based upon the past, but as far as where we're going, they're having a really hard, difficult, challenging time prognosticating where it is going to go. So this is so from January to June, this is where Wall Street and everybody was digesting the fact that the Federal Reserve was starting to make moves. And then starting in June, we saw that CPI, the core CPI, started to fall after hitting a height. So after hitting a height and coming down, it was like, they're going to be able to achieve their objective. And but remember, those dot plots come out, and when they started to come out again, they were saying, we're going to go up a little bit higher than what we said prior in the year, because they come out every 3 months and prognosticate where the interest rates are going to be. So then we have this. The Fed came out swinging, and this was in August of last year. Now, they went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which they did again this last August. But this last August, they came out, they barely said anything different. Now, August of 2022, they said, you guys should not be enjoying this retreat in the 10-year treasury and this retreat in interest rates. We're going to cause some pain. So that's when the Fed came out swinging. And as a result, interest rates were at 5% and the 10-year treasury was at a lower level. It rose. Interest rates, if you remember, went all the way up to 7.37%. And stayed above 7 in October and November is when it hit those high thresholds. Then we had these bigger drops in the core CPI after November, and that's why we started to see 10-year treasury relax, and we saw interest rates relax. And when that happened, we actually, by the time we got to February 1st, we hit interest rates of 5.99%. February 1st of this year, we had interest rates of 5.99%. And you could see that when we got to February 1st, we were at pretty much a low level for the 10-year treasury as well. That's what happened on February 1st. Now, like a couple of days later, it was Jobs Friday, and they reported January's jobs. And let me tell you, it was out of sight. And January jobs numbers was a gigantic, enormous release. And it was such a big increase that we had this drive up again in the 10-year treasury. And then we had the banking crisis. So once we had these regional banks, that crisis, which the Fed stepped in and helped out, they created an exchange, a place where they could park some of their money and take out money. So they kind of fixed the regional banking system. But there were several banks that failed. And when that happened, we saw that 10-year Treasury came down, and so did interest rates while everything was resolved. But then we got to this long period. And that was where there wasn't a lot of negative news. Instead, there was a lot of positive news that kept on rolling on top of each other, and it kept on going. And that was where the economy was just too hot. And then everybody was starting to talk about this soft landing. So that was all the way from April 1st all the way up until the Fed spoke most recently. Then the Fed spoke, and when they spoke, now, keep in mind, I talked to you about those dot plots. That's where they tell you where their forecast for mortgage, the Federal Reserve's short-term rate is going to be for not only the rest of this year, but the following year. And then they also, they're starting to tack on extra years as well. But keep in mind, they're not the best at forecasting where they need to be. They're able to tell you where they should be right now and maybe kind of hint at where they might go later on this year. Now, as a result, that dot plot that came out showed that they were backing off the number of times that they would actually be reducing the federal short-term rate, because everybody said that they were going to pivot, that they were going to come down a little bit in the short-term rate a few times in 2024, and now it's not looking like they're going to come down as far. And as a result, everybody's on board with this higher for longer. And then the Fed dots all came out, and as a result, since they met, we've had interest rates that have gone up. And we've had the bond market that has gone up to levels that we have not seen. Interest rates hitting highs that we had not seen. 7.7%. The last time we had a print at 7.7% was all the way in November of 2000. So I mean, you have to dust off your memory banks to even remember any back to the year 2000. And you could see that once again, interest rates from January of 2022 to where we are today, they've been going up, not straight up and continuing just to go up. They've been going up and down. It's very, very jagged on a daily basis, and it mirrors exactly what I was just referring to with the 10-year treasuries. And this is where the Fed came out swinging. Now, the Fed came out swinging on September 20th. That's where the Open Fair Market Committee came out, and then Jerome Powell, who is the Fed president, came out, and he's the head of the Federal Reserve. He came out and talked about that the dot plot, basically the interest rates were those short-term rates that they control, that they're going to have to remain higher for longer. And he didn't really even say that much in his speech. It was more the dot plots that were digested after the meeting that everyone was taking a look at, saying, hey, wait a minute, they are not going to pivot as much as we thought for 2024. We're really beginning to believe that this economy is going to stay hot forever, and we're going to have these higher forever, higher rates for longer mortgage rates. And that's just not quite the case. So what you saw ever since they came out and he did this speech, Jerome Powell, on September 20th, we've had the 10-year Treasury and mortgage rates spike. So we've hit an all-time high. So now it's just a matter of, okay, when is the overall economy going to slow down? So when is that going to happen? Because there are a lot of headwinds that nobody's talking about. You can actually hear about all the headwinds at my 2024 forecast. And basically, that means that we're probably pretty close to, as far as this ride up in 10-year Treasury and as far as where we are with these short-term rates that the Federal Reserve controls, we're probably very, very close to the top, and then we're going to be coming down on the other side. Everybody is just waiting to find something that breaks in the economy. And but we're at the precipice of that happening. It's just a matter of, okay, when is that going to happen? Not if, but when. And nobody can really put their finger on exactly when it's going to happen. It could happen sooner rather than later. What we're thinking is it's going to happen at the start of 2024, but it could happen, and we have different scenarios for if it happens in the middle of 2024 or even later in 2024. Everybody's just going to have to pack their patience and wait for that to occur, because We're a very instantaneous society. We like the gratification of knowing immediately what's going on. However, in this case, nobody knows. So you just have to sit back and kind of relax. And if you're a good economist, you just sit there and you watch trends and you look at all the trend lines over time and you know that good economics is long and boring. But that's what moves up me. I get excited every time a new print comes out. So there's a lot of anticipation for what's going to come out. So tomorrow morning when we get the jobs release data for the number of jobs that were created, I can't wait to see that number. So let's talk really quick about demand. And demand, the impact on demand, you could see here, I'm going to talk about what the change, if you compare demand at that given moment to the 3 years prior to COVID. I don't like to really compare it to 2020, 2021 or 2022, those, or 2000, yeah, I'm sorry, we are doing 2022, 2021 or 2020, because those were real COVID years and they impacted. Even the start of 2022 was a little bit different than where we were prior to COVID. So we like to look at that 3-year average, 2017, 18, and 19. And if you compare that, and you look at where we were in February, we were up 1.5%, up higher than that 3-year average. And that's where we started off the year. We were a little bit better than the 3-year average prior to COVID. There weren't that many homes. Every home that came on the market was just being gobbled up like crazy because interest rates were still low. They were rising, but they were still relatively low compared to where they currently are absolutely today. So a lot of people wanted to take advantage of where it was. But by the time we got to later on in the year, and we're talking in June, it was actually down 25% year over, actually not year over year, but compared to that 3-year average prior to COVID. So that was by June, it was down 25%. So the impact of rates getting higher and higher because they were going up at an alarming rate that nobody had been accustomed to prior. So it really took a big bite out of demand. And then we got to, by the time we got to August 1st, we remember over the summer in July to August 1st, we actually had this relaxed 10-year treasury and we had interest rates that came down off of their heights. And so as a result, it was only off 20% compared to the 3-year average prior to COVID. But still, interest rates were a lot higher than where they were at the beginning of the year, even if they were at 5% by August 1st. That brings us to then taking a look at where we were during when we had interest rates at 7.37%. That's where, if you compare it to the 3-year average prior to COVID, demand was off by 37%. It wasn't even worth looking at 2021 because 2021 was an anomaly where we had the most sales since 2005. So if you look at where it was prior to COVID, it was off 37%. Now, spring, we had an okay spring. We actually had interest rates come down a little bit, so we had a boost in demand. We were at off only 28%. That's off 37% to 28%, but that was in February of this year. And then after that, remember, after February, we got that jobs release, and then we had interest rates rise again. And so then as a result, by the time we got to June, we were off 36% again. And if I do the calculations based upon the last week, from last week's print to where we will be next week, because of these higher rates, it's going to go from like around 36% to off 39% compared to the 3-year average. That is the digestion of these higher rates. So we're digesting these higher rates going from where we were at in the sevens all the way up to making our way towards 7.7%. Now that just eliminates more borrowers, more buyers from the buyer's pool. A lot of them because they simply can't afford it. So as a result, when they simply can't afford it, they're going to sit back and wait for rates to come down. The more rates come down, the more demand is unleashed. And so if you take a look at demand, last week we're at 9,661. That was that blue line. And if you look at that blue line, it's been relatively flat. You don't see this giant drops. There are a couple places where it drops, and that is when we are digesting a little bit higher rates, but it's not a gigantic drop like what we saw on that orange line, which was last year. Now, last year at this time, we were at 11,092. But you can see the two lines between this year and last year are squeezing together. Now, today it's at 9,443. So that last week when we snapped the number, it was only down 1% in a 2-week period of time. Well, in the last week alone, it's down 2.3%. That's the digestion of these higher rates since the Federal Reserve came out and spoke. And then I just want to refer to where this demand is right now. The reason why it's not sinking much like crazy when we have these higher rates is because there's still a lot of people that will transact no matter what. We refer to it as inherent demand. That is where we have cash buyers. We have people with a lot of money. They can put down payments. They don't really care that much about the interest rates. They can afford the payments. And we have a lot of millennials and other people that have dual incomes that together they can afford right now. Are they happy with these higher rates? Not necessarily. They say that down the road when rates do finally come down, they will refinance. We're still hearing that out there. But a lot of people are realizing that this could be a longer wait than what they were originally anticipating. So that's the inherent demand. So when you have inherent demand, people are going to transact. They need this roof over their head. Regardless of where the market's at, we're still going to get buyers. It's not all of a sudden we're going to get no buyers, just as we always will get sellers in the marketplace. And it's almost like we're at inherent sellers levels, because there's some people that can care less about the rates on the other side, people that can sell their house and then buy something else all cash, or it's just same circumstances. There's people also that they have illnesses or death or divorce, or they're forced sellers. So there are very few forced sellers, but there are some. So we're dealing with inherent supply and inherent demand, which brings us to, we talked about this low demand. I want everybody to understand that we still have this housing shortage. And this housing shortage shows you that line that's pointing to those Himalayas in the middle. That was during the Great Recession, where we had nearly 4 million homes. It actually hit 4 million homes. And that is where you have a glut of inventory, way too many, and that's where you get prices that cave, that collapse. Where we are today is on the right-hand side. So even though inventory right now, which it should have peaked, has not peaked, it's still very, very low, a little over 1 million compared to where we were back during the Great Recession and prior to the Great Recession. There was no run up to the Great Recession, and all of a sudden we had 4 million. We had a lot of homes prior to the Great Recession. Everybody should understand that. And so as far as the available number of listings in Southern California is concerned, last week we were at 21,888. And it was up 2% in a 2-week period of time. Last year we were at 30,433, which is 39% higher. That's the orange line. The pre-COVID numbers are 40,934, which is 87% higher than where we are today. And today we're at 22,105, which is 1% up from, well, that's a typo, but we'll fix that for anybody that wants to copy this. But it is up 1%. So I do want everybody to see this. This just shows you where we were relative to back in time. The purple line was prior to COVID. That was 2019. The blue line is where we are right now. Now, typically we peak during the summer, and that's July to the end of August. And then we come down. Now, the orange line was last year. We did peak in the normal range, but then it was flat, actually slightly rising until we got to around November, and then it really started to fall. We are following last year's numbers. And the reason we're doing that is because we have demand that's come down just a little bit, and the people that are coming on right now aren't finding as much success as where they were earlier this year. And so as a result, we have inventory that is starting to accumulate a little bit. So even though we're in the fall market, which is when inventory typically comes down and demand comes down, we have inventory that's slightly rising. And that slight rise is going to continue, which is actually good news, which means we're going to have more homes to start off the year in 2024, because I was worried that we were going to have the fewest number of homes ever the start of 2022. I thought we were going to rival, because that's where we were on that red line was 2021. Orange line was 2022. So you could see if we were going to follow identical that red line, we're going to tie the world's lowest number of homes on the market to start off our new housing market for 2024. So we are going to have a few more than the orange line to start off 2024. It's just when does the number start coming down? And when the numbers start coming down in November, it will really start to come down, and then we will still have very, very few homes to start the following year. So what is the overall speed of the market? The speed of the market is, last week we were at 68 days. It went up 2 days in a 2 week period of time. Last year we were at 82 days at this time, and pre-COVID is at 84 days. That was prior to COVID, 2017, 18, 19. And today we're at 70 days, so gone up another 2 days from last week. Now, where we're at right now, the metric that we follow, supply and demand, is broken because of these extra high mortgage rates. So at these levels, at 68 days, this should be where we still have a seller's market where if you do the negotiations, sellers should totally get their ways. But that's not what's happening. It's moving more towards balanced. And the higher this number gets, which it's kind of going right now until we reach a peak, we're going to probably go into a slight buyer's market. There are some areas where values are coming down a little bit. You can see that in Riverside, San Bernardino, inland counties of the inland part of San Diego County, and inland part of LA County as well. So you just know that we're not going to cave. It's not collapsing, but until we have the inventory come down, and it'll come down quite a bit to start off 2024, which will set up a really hot spring in terms of very, very few homes on the market compared to this year at the start of the year. So if you want a copy of this presentation, you need to be a subscriber. If you want to subscribe to the report, go to reportsonhousing.com. You'll get the most recent one, sluggish yet no slide ahead. There's a coupon code for a free month, and that's BREAK. So use the coupon code BREAK for a free month. We have a podcast that comes out. It comes out every other week. It's called Let's Talk Housing. Wherever you want to listen to your podcast, go ahead and search up Let's Talk Housing. Put in Reports on Housing also, because there's a few other people that say Let's Talk Housing. The most recent one that came out dropped Wednesday. More on affordability. So we go back and forth. We have a very good discussion, Brennan and myself. So I appreciate you staying tuned in once again. Thank you for joining us for yet another housing debrief. I hope you have a fantastic finish to your week, and we will see you on the other side.